This is the caller judgment session. We are in Cary, North Carolina, and today is March 26, 2013. My name is Clark Baker, and I'm moderating, and for panelists, we have Mike Seastrom from Los Angeles. One clap. One clap. And Dick Henschel from Concord, California. Ooh. They do. I will start off by a little bit of introduction and a little bit of opinion on my own, and then each of them will speak, and then we're happy to open it up, and I can have some more to say, and I'm sure they can too. This is the third year that CALLERLAB has had a caller judgment session. I am excited we have one. I think it's a topic that is deep, fascinating, and everyone has an opinion. Every year we've been changing up who's part of it, so we get different opinions. So I think at some point the tapes will be an interesting thing, and maybe 10 or 20 years from now it'd be interesting to look back and see what we thought today. A square dance caller makes many decisions while performing his job. Some of these decisions are easy and obvious, especially to experienced callers. Others are not so easy, and different callers may make different decisions when presented with identical situations. Usually, the results of a decision are minor or can be easily fixed. I guess that would be the bad results. Occasionally, the decision has far-reaching consequences. As far as I know, CALLERLAB has never had a talk on this subject. This was from my first year, before last year. Perhaps we were afraid that it was too subjective, that we would be examining judgments, ruling them good or bad, perhaps with an eye towards somehow codifying judgments. I did find the following mention of good judgment in Jack Lazari's Notes for Callers from 1970. He is speaking about the new experimental call, Alter the Wave. He says, I would advise using it from standard waves until the flow and pattern are well understood. It really dances nice, but use your good judgment in selecting the groups to present it to. So it's not like the idea of judgment and good or bad judgment hasn't been around for a while. So let's define it. What is judgment? I looked on the web like everyone does. Here are some definitions that seem applicable to our activity. Judgment, the capacity to assess situations or circumstances shrewdly and to draw sound conclusions. The cognitive process of reaching a decision or drawing conclusions. The considered evaluation of evidence in the formation of making a decision. And we can contrast that with the definition of, well, what's a decision? Like there's a judgment and there's a decision. So what's a decision? The decision is the act of making up your mind about something, or a position or opinion or judgment reached after consideration. So I think the idea is we could flip a coin to make a decision. The coin makes the decision. Deciding that we're going to use a coin as the decision maker and flip it, that's a judgment call. We want to be making good judgments, and the bulk of this talk will be a discussion of where good judgment comes from and how to develop it. And here's some definitions I found online of good judgment. Having a sense of what's good or beneficial for yourself or others. That involves making a balanced decision, weighing the pros and cons. It's what happens when all the following interact in a single moment. Experience, freedom from preconceptions and biases, a thorough awareness of the exact details of the situation at hand, a concern for fairness and the welfare of all involved, and a willingness to take responsibility for choosing and the consequences thereof. So is good judgment the same as common sense? And the answer is perhaps no, because common sense is sound judgment not based on specialized knowledge. Much of our calling decisions are based on specialized knowledge. So what about our activity? Normally, I think of judgment or good judgment in terms of choreography and was this too easy, too hard, and all that. But I didn't want this just to be a choreography session, so I was trying to think of other aspects of our activity where judgment comes in. Most of the myriad decisions we make as square dance callers require some judgment. We use our experience, weigh the pros and cons of taking action in one direction versus another. We make a decision and head down that path. Often these decisions relate to choreography, and we will spend some time talking about this. The example I opened with from Jack Lazary related to choreography. Which groups would it be appropriate to present a new experimental call to, especially a call that's a little tricky? However, I want us not to limit the discussion to only choreography, and here are some other areas in which we make decisions requiring good judgment. Should you even accept a booking? How do you dress? How early to arrive at the event? Do you have backup in case of equipment failure? How long are your tips? How long are your breaks? What's your behavior to dance, both on stage and off stage? Are you engaged at the breaks, interacting with the dancers and happy to be at their dance? Or are you outside smoking or on your cell phone? Music selection, such as the use of alternative music and certain types of singing calls. How fast? What's the tempo? What's your entertainment style, including the use of yellow rock, 4 dishwashers, promenade inside, sexist calling, that kind of thing. Sussing the floor, figuring out what this floor can or cannot handle. And CALLERLAB in the past has at least 3 or 4 years of, how many? Has 3 years of sussing the floor sessions on tape, each with different, at least 2 or 3 people telling you how they particularly do that skill. Programming an evening. When do you bail on your anticipated program? After party skits. How do you come across an email, especially when upset? Ethical decisions. And of course, the major ones are spelled out in our code of ethics. There are no hard and fast rules for each of these decisions. Different callers will have different opinions. One caller's opinion will vary by area. What works in the United States may not work in Europe, and will be different yet again in Japan. 2 other points, and then I'm going to move on to the panel. 1, most judgments qualify as good or bad, mainly after some time has passed and the consequences of those actions are measured. And we make decisions based on the information available at the moment. Later on, you could find out the decision was not the best based on new information, but like, what could you have done? So at this point, let me stop because I've talked for a bit and hear from these guys. Which one of you wants to go? Here's Dick.
Okay, thank you. One of the things I found most interesting is when I was asked to do this panel, I thought, good judgment. I think, holy mackerel, what do I say about good judgment? And I have to admit, in all honesty, I didn't go back and listen to the MP3s, even though I have them on what Clark Baker did. And yet, hearing him list off the various things, it's pretty much everything I came up with, plus a few extra ones. It really is. I thought I was. It's the more I thought about it, the more I thought, where does a caller have to use good judgment? And the more I thought about it, from the minute he enters into the hall till the minute he leaves the hall, and in some ways even before. Do you have gas in your car? How far do you travel? You got air in your spare tire? I got to thinking about, wow, all of these things are judgment things that involved. And so I came up with a lot of the same things that Clark did, having approached it kind of in a vacuum, if you will. I came up with a simple one sentence. What is good judgment? To me, what I came up with and brought it down to is applying your judgment to a given situation based on your knowledge and experience. And then I thought, no, where do you use this? Continuously. You always use it. I mean, whether you're talking with a dancer between tips or what you're saying over the microphone. Obviously, what you say over a microphone affects a lot more everybody in the hall, and you can't take words back from what you say over a microphone. But at the same time, when you're talking to a dancer, hey, how are you doing, Joe? You know, what's going on? You're still one of the terms I've often heard, and I'm sure all of you have also. You're on duty when you're calling, and that on duty includes while you're on break. Yeah, I've seen callers that during break they leave the hall and they don't talk with people. Personally, I love talking with people. I really enjoy it, but at the same time, you have to be very aware that you're still on duty. That's part of what you're doing. Trying to go through my notes real quick and think of anything else that was different. I don't want to repeat everything that Clark was saying. One of the other approaches I took to it was, well, we're talking about good judgment. Well, what are the things that impede good judgment? The number one thing I came up with as a caller is poor planning. Just running into a dance without having any idea of what you're going to do at that dance, whether it involves the music, your choreography, your teaching, what calls are you going to teach in a given tip. If you don't have good planning, your judgment's probably going to end up being pretty poor because you're going to do things on the fly and it just doesn't work as well. As you get more and more experience, obviously you become better at doing things on the fly, but I think what I came up with is poor planning is a big impediment to using good judgment. And that involves all the things that Clark was saying, your choreography, your equipment, your music. Choosing when to push your choreography and when to back off and do a relaxing tip, that's certainly a very big part of using good judgment. As far as things that are impediments, sometimes our egos get in the way as callers. If you make a mistake or do something, you don't get your dancers back, how do you handle that? And that's part of planning. For somebody that's been calling for a number of years, you've worked out how to handle that. For newer callers, it can be, how do I handle the fact that I didn't get them back to where they're supposed to be? And that's something you can plan out ahead of time. So here again, that involves the planning. Another thing that I came out with as an impediment that's also part of what Clark mentioned was sometimes, particularly for a newer caller, you're trying to get your name out there and become known, and you have to have a good knowledge of what your own limitations are. Don't take a dance that's a level higher than what you can call, thinking, well, in the next 2 weeks I can learn how to call C1. Yeah, no, that's ain't going to work. So you have to think about, be realistic of what your own capabilities are, and that fits into the whole planning process. And those are pretty much the main thoughts that I had. I want to turn that over to Mr. Seastrom.
All right, thank you, Dick. When I heard initially a few years back that we had this session at the CALLERLAB conventions, I was excited because for many, many years here at CALLERLAB, we've said it's just part of good judgment, and we've used that judgment word so many times and yet have never really defined it. And so I listened intently to the other sessions of previous years, and not only Clark with his session, I think Lottie, I think you were a panelist in previous sessions as well. I really enjoyed these sessions because it's the first time I think we've really broken that down and really looked at the whole concept of good judgment. And quite possibly the biggest factor, I think, in judgment, and Dick, you mentioned lack of planning, but sometimes lack of planning is lack of experience. Not knowing a situation would crop up, and all of a sudden coming across that situation, and then I think there's where the important thing is for us as leaders and as callers is we need to take responsibility and not just push it off on a situation, but stand up and take that responsibility and accept what we need to do to fix it, to make it happen. And so where we either lack experience or we're just not expecting something to come up. We need to kind of step up to the plate and figure out what it is. It could be something as simple as how you handle a workshop at a weekend, or how you handle a club dance, or coming into a dance situation where you might have programmed something, or even programmed a particular tip and really just bombed the floor, or perhaps got in over your head, and how you would gently get out, or how you could use humor and such to back off a little bit and to get yourself out of a situation. Because I think we've all been in those situations, in teaching and workshopping, in club dances. And so I think that some of the things are being able to have that control, that experience where you can see something coming that you're going to have to make a decision about how you're going to handle something, and accept the responsibility for that, and having the ability with your experience to predict an outcome before it happens. And it doesn't happen with all of us. We can get in even experienced scholars get into a situation where you say, I could have approached this differently, or instead of saying that these guys can't dance. And I think you got to accept a little bit of responsibility, back it up a little bit, and say, how could I get that floor through that? How could I make this a dance where these dancers can dance? I mean, it could be a full moon, it could be raining outside, it could be a lot of other things that could affect the attitude and the crowd that comes into that particular event. But the important thing is how you handle it, and I think it's really important as a caller that we accept the responsibility as the entertainer, and that we figure out the solution to make that event an enjoyable or an event. If you come in and how many have come to a dance and you square them up and the president gets up and announces that someone in the club has just passed away, and the entire attitude of the floor is like, I mean, it's just like people could be excited. The round dance pre-round program is going, and boom, 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 boom. And then they pass the mic to you. Well, so what do you do from there? How many, just as a show of hands, how many does that happen to? It's amazing. It is, and it's amazing how it can just deflate the entire attitude of the club. And so, it's happened a couple times to me, and in that situation, I says, well, it's obvious that Joe Smith was an amazing guy, and so why don't we dedicate the night from him? And I'm sure if he's looking down, he's going to be dancing right along with us. And then I'll put on a patriotic song or a gospel or something or other, and we'll get it up, and you just pick it up and you go from there. And hopefully you can raise up the level and dedicate the evening to him and kind of turn it all around a little bit. And so it's accepting a responsibility and not just being beat up by it and walking away. The other thing that I think is really important is record keeping on the part of callers. And this is something that I learned years ago from Jim Mayo. And Jim said very often when we go into a particular area to call, and maybe you only go in there once a year or twice a year, do you ever keep records of what you do when you go in there? I'm talking about if you do singing calls, what singing calls you did. I'm talking about if you wore a particular outfit, writing that down as well. Writing down the names of people you met in that particular event or that particular weekend. Now, I never did any of this, and just a year before I heard Jim talk about this at one CALLERLAB convention, I went back into New Orleans to do a big Saturday night special, and it was 2 years since I've been there before, and the guy picks me up from the airport, and he says, "God, Mike, that's the same shirt you had on 2 years ago, I said, "Oscar, how would you know this was the same shirt that I said, "I really liked it 2 years ago, and when you came in here, and I still like it." And I realized that some people remember those things. I sure didn't, so I started keeping records. I write down to this day. I write down what I wore and the people that I met who were presidents, who were and it gives you the opportunity when you go back a couple of years later to just review that and say, and if you still like to wear the same things, I don't care. That doesn't matter that much. But you might want to check out some names and who cued the rounds for you and what singing calls you started and ended with, and maybe even some of the choreography you used, because some people remember that kind of thing. And it helps you to make a judgment. You can make even a mention that I did real easy mainstream, with limited variety because that's what they could do. And I make little notes and stuff, so I can go back there and have a better chance with the experience that I had before of making the right kind of judgment for the program or that evening or that weekend. So I think it's important to use your experience, use some record keeping, and to try to predict the best outcome that we can have. Clark, you want to go from here?
Sure. I actually, when you were talking about not the record keeping right before that, like when someone died at, or not died at your dance, but they mentioned, and relating to our keynote speaker, change and accepting change, and what do you do? As soon as that happened, there's been change in your caller life. How are you going to do? What are you going to do? Are you going to run from it? Are you going to, passively, aggressively do something, or what? And as you say, you're embrace the change, run with it, have a plan, and so forth. This is not what I want in front of me. This one. Oh, you stupid thing. Don't do that. Excuse me. Square color judgment. There we go. So one of the questions is, if we kind of believe we have good judgment, bad judgment, and all that, how do you get better at good judgment? Maybe especially if you're a newer caller. And I found a quote that I really liked that says, and this was like credited to 5 different people, so it must be one of those things that just goes around. Good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgment. Right? You kind of think about that. While experience, both good and bad, is a necessary ingredient, what's important is how you use that experience. You need to analyze the results of the decision reached and possibly modify your behavior in the future. Without this feedback loop, there's no learning and no change in judgment. So I'm basically talking about introspection. You have to always be aware. One way to be aware is to take notes, to write down stuff, and think about what happened. You can't just go, oh, that was a horrible dance, I couldn't wait to get out of there, and then put it out of your mind, or that kind of situation is going to happen again and again to you. You have to be thinking about it all the time. So, for example, you accept a booking to do a father-daughter dance for the Girl Scouts. The dance was difficult for you to call, and you couldn't wait for it to be over, pack up your equipment, and leave. If you fail to reflect on the decisions you made, from accepting the booking to how to start the dance to the flexibility you had with the evening's program and your ability to adjust to what was going on, how you did the crowd control, your demeanor at the mic, your judgment in those situations isn't going to change or improve. One tool to help in this process is to write notes from each gig that you do. These notes would include what time you arrived, what time the event was scheduled to start, when it actually started, a description of the hall and where you set up, how many people attended, what your program was, what you did for the first dance, when they took the middle break, how experienced the dancers were, and important notes to remember if you accept another booking from this group. Like even a note saying, don't ever go back there, right? You still need to remember that. If you tried to teach Grand Square and it was a big mistake, make a note of that. Another component of developing better judgment is that of prediction. Were we to make a change, we need to be able to predict what we think the results of that change are. In this way, we're always considering possible alternatives and choosing the one with the best predicted results. So the components of acquiring and improving your judgment would be experience, you got to have stuff happening, reflection, you got to think about what happened, and prediction, using everything you've got and know, and you have several alternatives in front of you, which is the right one for the situation right now. Judgment's learned. The way we learn most things in life is through experience, followed by reflection, followed by an attempt to improve. Eventually, we can handle similar experiences without even thinking. In calling, we can get plenty of experience. Every gig is an experience. What we don't take enough advantage of is the reflection part. We need to think about what went well and what didn't go so well and figure out what we would do differently next time. And just to insert an instant example of that, I was just in the game session, which I was asked somewhat at the last minute. I mean, I knew it before I was coming here. And if I were really good, I would write down exactly what I talked about in the game session this year. I'd write down any ideas I had that I didn't get to. I'd write down any ideas the other guys presented or ideas I had based on that, and I'd put it away. And if I'm ever asked to do game session again, I could pull out and remember what it was like and that feeling of in the hall and walking out of that room. And then I would be better prepared for the next time I'm asked to do games. But I didn't do any of that. We also need to work on our prediction skills. For example, if you decide to teach a call to a group of dancers, you are predicting that they will be able to learn it in a short amount of time from your instructions. We've all been in situations where we've tried to teach something and it wasn't going very well. Kind of you overreached or something. If we had the ability to predict that it wouldn't go well, perhaps we wouldn't have gone down that path. Maybe it was too late at night. Maybe we didn't have the right teaching words. Maybe the dancers didn't need to learn something new at this moment, and they just needed to have fun dancing. We need to be able to predict the results of our actions, and that skill also comes from experience and reflection on that experience. So if I go to one of these talks and someone says the 5 ways to become a better caller are blah, 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 I never remember any of that. Like, the keynote had 8 different, she even gave us 10 ways to be better at stuff, but we had 8 or so different reaction types, personality types to change. I can't remember those. I can go look it up, but the thing I do remember is stories. I think people are naturally storytellers, and we remember stories and pass stories on. So, the stories, the anecdotes, the examples that make the main points, that's what sticks with me. So I think it's worth having us talk about some times when we know that it'd be best if it was our own experience. We exercised bad judgment and think about that and talk about that. And then, and I'll go first. Is anyone else going to be willing to think of a story? Oh, good. We have at least 2 hands up there. So New England has a New England Square and Round Dance Convention each year, and I would go call there. Mainly I'd call in the Challenge Hall. Mainly the challenge dancing was pretty insipid because it was just C1. And it had been a tough weekend, and I'd done some calling and done a lot of dancing and supported a lot of people. We had some of my friends there, but we also had some people I don't normally see or call to, older people, and I don't know who their callers are. And the whole weekend was spent calling the easiest material I had. I think it's turned on, but here it goes in here. That looks good. We're looking at the wireless mic. Is this powered on? Is the That's good. That's whatever you hit and doing it. Okay, now it's on. Don't touch it and don't step on anything. Yeah. I wonder why it's so bad. Okay, it's on. Yeah. Yeah, someone... Yeah, we still don't have the wireless mic yet, though, but maybe we'll have them come up here, and our recorders right? Anyhow, okay. So here I am. I'm at the end of the convention, and I've had to pull my punches the whole time. The easiest material I brought, baby the people through the stuff, and my attitude at the time is I want to just call one tip where I can just call smooth flowing, roll it out, C1 material. C1 dancers should be able to dance. So I figured using good judgment. Next tip, I'm going to be calling just as I've been calling, and the last tip might be a little tougher, a little faster, and we're just going to roll it on out, and that'll be the end of the convention. It'll be 11 o'clock. And they stared at me. And at the end of the tip, this guy comes up and goes, "Son, you ruined my convention. That was a horrible thing for you to do. We didn't get a single sequence there." And I don't know what else he said. I tried not to argue with him. I tried to just go, "I'm sorry I did that. You're right. You stood there. Yes, it was too fast. Yes, it was too hard. I'm sorry that happened." And I almost gave him his money back right there. I mean, not that the convention's my convention, but I'd be happy to give him $35 if he'd go away and stop yelling at me in my face. So, and then I packed up. I felt like crap. I got in the car and I drove to the after party, which was no longer fun for me, pondering and thinking. I guess that's the reflection part. Did I blow it, make a mistake, or was I right? Because I never do anything intentionally that would be wrong. None of us do. We're not there to do the wrong thing. I mean, we aren't robbing banks and stuff. We're always justifying to ourselves why our actions were the best right thing right now, even when they aren't. So I had to think about that. And in retrospect and stuff, I mean, it kind of ruined the rest of my convention, but hey, I'd ruined his, so we were even. I didn't do the right thing, and the change in behavior would be my new good judgment is I don't do that anymore. I mean, I would never think of doing that now. I'm much more careful about, am I entertaining everybody, what's right for everybody, and so forth. So that's one of my bad judgment stories.
Just piggyback on that, I think we're all kind of in the situation where we go into an event and we're calling, and you realize you got this huge divide in the floor where some of your dancers who have really worked at their craft and have worked at dancing are there to dance a certain way, and you've got other dancers that are just barely hanging on by their fingernails. And so how do you handle that? And I think all of us have been forced to kind of make decisions or maybe even modify the program somewhat to the event. Now, Clark's going to say that the last tip we'll just let things loose or let her go, and very often those that are hanging on by their fingernails are still not going to get it, that they're going to give it a try, and whether you can preface it a little bit more or saying we're going to be, calling, with no stops and goes, we're just going to let it loose, anything goes kind of thing. I mean, whatever you can do to try to encourage those. Sometimes it's neat to be able to say we're going to do a tip after the dance is over, or we're going to, during coffee break while the line goes through, we'll do something. But I think that's a dilemma that we all face at certain times, and to try to make that decision is a difficult one. So, Dick?
Since Clark was so brave to talk about a bad situation that happened to him, I remember one situation, and I still honestly don't know if I did the right thing or wrong thing. Maybe the rest of you out here can tell me. I remember a few years ago I was doing a dance, and it was my club and another club were dancing together during the summer, and we had about 5 squares on the floor. And to be totally honest, between the two clubs, we had about 4 couples that really were very good. That's the honest truth of it. And normally those people were spread out through the club, and the level, I kept the level pretty low so that everybody could keep dancing. And I remember one time I was squaring the people up, and lo and behold, all of the not quite as competent dancers ended up in one square. Okay, so I have one square over here, and I'm looking at them, and I'm thinking, I don't care what I'm going to call, this square is not going to get through it. But I had 4 other squares on the floor. And I made the decision, and here we're talking about judgment here. At that time, I made the decision, this tip I'm going to call for the other 4 squares. And that's what I did, and I called in. As far as I was concerned, those 4 squares did great, and everything went wonderful. The other squares stood there 90% of the time. And when the tip was over, one of the fellas in the square, he came up to me and read me the riot act. Didn't you see that we couldn't get through anything? Obviously, I'm not going to tell him, of course, I knew before the square started you weren't going to get through anything. But that was the honest truth of what I was thinking. I apologized to the gentleman, and that's it. And I still, to this day, don't honestly know if I really did the right thing or not. But that was my decision at that tip, was I'm going to let the other 4 dancers, dance a decent level this tip.
Don, you're going to have to come up to the front to talk, because our portable mic is not so portable. So don't touch the cords.
I'm portable. Don Beck, Massachusetts. I had a few things I wanted to say, but first, in comment to what you said, Dick, I found a lot of what was the tactful word you used? Weaker dancers don't know if they're screwing up an easy call or a hard call. So if they're going to screw up anyway, you might as well give them hard calls so that the others can have some fun. I'm thrilled to have it here that you guys are doing a session, or we're all doing a session on judgment. I was figuring, I think it was 1968, I went to Jim Mayo's caller school. And of course, I was a young caller and wanted to learn choreography. That's what callers had to learn. And Jim taught me so many things that I didn't know were things I had to learn. And one of the sessions that stuck with me the longest was a session on judgment. And I remember some of the quotes from that session. I don't remember, unfortunately, as much as I'd like to. Well, I probably have integrated it into my feelings, but not the exact words. But one of the things he said, the first half of this statement is what dance callers in general used to say. Dancers like to be challenged. But he added, dancers like to be challenged, but win. Makes you think. They think they want to be challenged. They don't really want to. We'd been talking there. I can't remember. He brought it up or I threw this in, but it was part of the judgment thing. One of the local clubs, actually it wasn't local, I just moved into the area, but one of the local clubs did it also. The caller had an elimination dance. Where I was, they called it an idiot dance or an I did it dance, where he would just call harder and harder material, and the rule was when your square broke down, you sat down, and the one square that was remaining at the end would get some kind of a dangle. And Jim said this was a poor thing. And I said, why? We did it, and we were the last square, and it was great. We had a great time. He said, what about the other 28 squares? And I thought about that. So I guess my comment is, one thing on judgment is think about the other 28 squares. Think about the big picture. Don't make that snap decision on what you're snapping at. Think about the big picture and the overall results, be it short-term or long-term, preferably long-term. It's a hard thing to do, but at least be aware of it and get you thinking. Thank you.
Where's your example of bad judgment?
Where's my... The bad judgment is that I just got up here and told stories.
Jim Wass, Riverdale, Maryland, and Clark, you reminded me of both of these. The Girl Scout, the father-daughter dance, it wasn't Girl Scouts, and the Grand Square, both. No, not together. I heard you say that, and I say, oh, I never had a problem with a Girl Scout. Well, yeah, I had a problem with a father-daughter dance. One time when I was, not because of choreography, I was enforcing protocol. Anybody in here know that when you're forming long contra lines, where do the new people get on? They get on at the end. So this 7-year-old or so and her father were getting on at the front. I said, no, you get on at the end. She never stopped crying until that dance was over. There's a time to enforce protocol, and there is a time not to. And that ties together also when you're doing some of your dances. I have several versions of mixer dances where I leave the mixer. There is no partner change, and that happened when I watched a 5-year-old start to scream as a mom and child were being separated. But I showed good judgment and said, no, we're not going to do that after all. And then on the Grand Square, I used to use it more than I do now. Party dances and on the Eastern Shore, Ocean City, Maryland, DC,
it's not really up to the program that we had. And guess what happens? When I want to call my my big finish tip, they're all together in the same square. And I knew from the beginning that it wasn't really going to happen for them. But I had a bunch of other squares on the floor. So I started to call, and yeah, they're going down all over the place. And I even threw them a bone a couple of times. You familiar with doing that? Well, I'll try throwing something in here that you guys can do. But of course, by the time I was doing that, they were already rattled by what had happened by the 3 or 4 sequences in front of that, and they were basically discouraged, and they couldn't do anything anymore. They couldn't square through or bow to their partner even. So I basically called to the rest of the floor. They all had a great time. And we're talking about one square out of, I think there was about 7 or 8 squares on the floor, if I remember. So at the end of the tip, one of these guys comes up to me, and because I was actually trying to work with them, and I kept throwing them a bone every once in a while, and they kept screwing it up, I was actually getting angry with them. And it was like, why can't you guys do any of this stuff? What are you doing on this floor? And I was really starting to get incensed. And then one of them had the nerve to come up to me after the tip and complain that they hadn't gotten anything in that last tip. And I just reacted. I didn't, and in retrospect, this is where I learned something about judgment. But I just reacted, and I said, well, did you notice that all the other squares on the floor got just about every sequence? And he literally did this, like I slapped him or something. And he sort of mumbled something and left. And as soon as I saw him react like that, I felt like hell. It's like, oh no. First of all, I didn't consider that a professional response on my part. I mean, this guy's a customer. You never slap a customer, and that's obviously the way he took it, regardless of whether it was true or not. It was absolutely true, what I said. So I regard that as bad judgment that I responded that way, or at least in the tone that I responded in. But thinking about it in retrospect, I wonder if that made that person go away and think, well, maybe this isn't really the floor for me. Maybe I should be dancing somewhere else where I have a firmer grasp of what's going on. Maybe I did him a favor. Now, that probably...
Saturday evening dance, there were a lot of new dancers on the floor, and enough new dancers where I had probably a quarter to a third of the floor that I had had programmed to call some things to teach for a workshop and realize very to back right on down and shift gears a little bit and teach something a little bit easier, keep the majority of the workshop more experienced dancers. And I did. I admitted to him that I did because we had a lot of new dancers. And he said, well, it wasn't. I'll be back tonight anyway. And I just figured there's sometimes you just have to eat it, and you're not going to please everybody. And I think you got to realize that you're going to do the best you can, and that's what it's all about.
Mike Oliveri, Denver. We've been talking about choreographic judgments. It has taken me years, especially becoming a caller, to realize that you don't say the first thing that pops into your head over the microphone. And the evidence of that was I was teaching a club's lessons. I'd been doing dances for them every quarter, so it was a regular booking. They had moved into a new hall. The sound was absolutely terrible. They tried putting baffles on the wall, stuff like that. The echo was just awful. One night at lessons during the summertime, we got locked out of the building. The person with the key hadn't shown up. There was an electrical outlet outside. So we set up a turntable, we set up a yak stack, and outside we started lessons. And I made the comment without even thinking of, wow, sounds better out here than it does inside. And the club president was there, and it's taken 11.5 years to
Here's Don Beck.
Clark, I want to answer your question. What misjudgment I made. But I do want to throw in one comment first. Barry, another quote from Jim Mayo. Think clean thoughts. Even when you're thinking reverse what some of the other guys were saying, but back when I was teaching classes in Tech Square was a unique thing of teaching at a more accelerated pace than CALLERLAB recommends, let's put it that way. And the students handle it, and the whole atmosphere of the square and the whole makeup was appropriate this way. But that year I was really still of the feeling that everybody should be allowed to learn to dance, and everybody can dance. And we had several dancers, 2 or 3 couples out of maybe 5 squares, 6 squares, that were more typical dancers and couldn't learn at the pace of the Tech Squares. And my judgment over a course of 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks was to review enough and reteach enough, simple enough choreography to keep them going. And during the course of that period, we probably lost a dozen potentially good dancers for that club. And the inevitable happened. The weaker dancers eventually lost anyway. They couldn't keep up, and we lost them, which in general was a good thing. They didn't belong there. And when people come up to us and talk about stuff like that, we say, it's not you. This is a unique situation. There are plenty of clubs around that you could fit in their classes right now. You've learned enough so you'd fit in where they are, and it'd be a much more comfortable rate for you. But instead of thinking that I called too hard and left people out, I called too easy and lost people that were appropriate for that group. Inappropriate. Judgment is tough, but in retrospect, it's a
This is Mike Callahan from New York. This is not necessarily a story about poor judging, but a number of years ago, I was booked for a club. My name was on the schedule, and as I'm setting up my equipment, another caller comes in with his equipment in hand. So, we said, what are we going to do? And it was obvious that the club office was very prepared because they found both contracts. And so we decided that everybody had a great time. Nice. That was using big judgment. Club officers all. Right. So, but that does happen.
Betsy Gotta from New Jersey. Now, I've been around a long time. I've been calling a long time. I usually have a big sense of but, and it was fairly recent, last year or so. I live in New Jersey, and I had a job calling near Albany. It was a 3.5-hour drive. So, Roy, my husband, was going to a meeting in Oklahoma City, so I got to drive this by myself. I had the start of a very, very nasty cold. I drove up. They had added, instead of a full hour of C1 at the beginning, or C2 at the beginning, they had added Class C2 so that they could bring in some of the people from northern New Jersey who were learning C2. So I arrive, I'm tired, I don't feel well, etc. I set up, and I'm calling C2. Well, the new people were scrambling like crazy and not the actual call. And the experienced people were rusty. So I'm trying to cue and I'm trying to help and all of this stuff. And at one point I said, you need such and such a formation. And a woman right in front of me must have felt like I was speaking to her, because she looks me in the eye and says, I'm in the right place. And I said, You can be in the right place or your square can continue to dance. And at that instant, I didn't care if I ever went back there again because I still had, let's see, another hour and a half of C1 to call, 2 hours of advance to call, and a 3.5-hour drive home. And I then had to get up in the morning to go to the meeting by Skype. At that instant, I didn't care. I cared later, but I must have, because the next time I called, but you won't always get away with making a remark like that, no matter how much it might be justified in your mind.
You know, Mike, the comment that Mike Callahan had about a dance like that, we had a similar experience, and I had gone to a dance, and all the way to the dance, I was having a discussion with my wife about how busy things were, and she was complaining that they were just too busy, and just so happened that when that 2 callers showed up, and the first caller was already there setting up his equipment, that I said, this would be a wonderful night for me to take my wife to dinner. That's what I did, and it turned out to be a real good decision for me, and better judgment on my behalf. And he was already set up and visible. Everybody saw him. I just kind of peeked in the door and went, we're going to dinner. So worked out really good for me.
Here's another example I hit. I think we are supposed to end this at 5:15, so we'll finish by 5:15. This particular email resonated with me enough that I brought the idea. This is the thing that caused me to bring the idea of this talk to the EC. This is in 2010. There was a discussion thread on one of the SD callers boards that I monitor and the title was Square Dance Attrition. And different points of views were offered about what our problem is. And Ernie, how do you say his last name? Colthurst. Yeah, he's the former board chairman of Legacy. And he gets on every once in a while and expresses some opinions, and he has strongly held opinions. I don't know that I've ever met him. He responded to one viewpoint with the following. He says, I don't think it's a matter of dancers getting their money's worth. It's a matter of having fun, feeling wanted, and not having to dance the cutesy calls that so many callers call. Many callers think they are self-appointed to teach the dancers something at every dance. Dancers hate workshop sessions at a dance. Callers are entertainers, not educators at a dance. We were at a dance last Sunday, and a caller called a fractionalized grand square. She killed the floor. I approached her after the tip, and she said, fractionalized calls are legal according to CALLERLAB. Later in an email message, she justified her calling a fractionalized grand square by comparing it to an 8-chain through and a square through, presumably meaning the fractions you can do with those calls. I responded that these fractionalized calls are taught in most beginner dance series, but a fractionalized grand square is not. She has replied. I told her that she is supposed to be an entertainer, not an instructor at a club dance. She responded that she is not an entertainer and she does what she does because she loves the activity so much. BS. Maybe we should ask the dancers why they don't come to square dances. You may get a mouthful and you may not like what you hear. I could give other example of cutesy calls, but I will not waste your time. It boils down to what we are selling the dancers. What we are selling, the dancers are not buying. We are selling Edsels instead of Focus vehicles. And I thought that was great. I mean, it has a lot of stuff to talk about. With respect to our subject, some of the stuff I got out of it, and this is going to tie into one more thing I want to mention. What do dancers want or expect at a club dance? I mean, we have our view of what we think they're supposed to be there for, but how about from their point of view? Is teaching something appropriate at a club dance? What's your judgment? Are you going to teach a call, not teach a call? How do you decide that? Is fractionalizing grand square a good workshop idea? Not if Bernie's there. Is it proper to fractionalize grand square? Kind of more of an arc question, for example. How did the caller here's a good one. How did the caller respond when an upset dancer approached her? Clearly not very well. Pretty defensive and right fighting, right? No, I can do this. I did it right. Why is she or you in a leadership position at dances? Are we just leaders because we're the one on stage, we're paid money? Like, why is that role there? Should callers try to figure out why dancers don't come to square dances? Is that some committee at CALLERLAB's job? Is that something we should each be thinking about? Where's the responsibility lie there? My experience says that teaching fractionalized grand square to club dance was probably a bad decision, especially given the above email. It would be interesting to hear the caller's side of the story and if she would make any changes in the future. You know, every story has two sides. Who knows what really happened?
Interesting. I don't know how I got this. I think I read your example, but I hear this a lot. I hear people say to me that this is right according to CALLERLAB. You know, I don't think CALLERLAB just specifically says that we can fractionalize grand square. Again, we would say this is caller judgment. And I think a proper response would be to accept the responsibility that either you thought that the floor would enjoy it for the evening, or that you might have made a bad judgment, particularly using that sequence. I mean, some of those sequences can be done where you can't possibly miss the ending of the sequence. It's an Alaman left, or bam, you're home, or you just can't possibly. And I think all of us call things where it's like a you can't lose get out. You know, your corner's right in front of you or something like that. So did she use probably the response and taking responsibility is a big part of it. How many of us get people to come up and say the sound is horrible or I can't understand you, and I had a gentleman a few weeks ago at a festival say that to me, and I said I remembered him wearing hearing aids, and I said to him, I said do you use a hearing assistance device? And he says, I forgot my hearing aids. And I said, well, come on up to the front. Just I'll make sure you can dance in the front. I mean, it was obviously a problem that he was having because he forgot his hearing aids, and we did not have hearing assistant devices. And so there are instances where I think you have to work with the people and try to make it work for them, and accept responsibility. Maybe in some cases adjust your sound, adjust the heights of your speakers, whatever it takes to kind of to make something go, or if you just think it's their personal problem, then help them handle it in that way.
Yeah. Just real quick, just to follow up with what Mike was saying, I think one of the most difficult situations all of us as callers face is in the middle of a tip, getting some response from the dancers out on the floor while you're calling. I can't hear in the back, or whatever, your music's too loud, whatever. How to deal with that is something I think that fits into the pre-planning of how you're mentally going to respond to it.
I think we are forced with good or with making judgments at all time, and we're all going to make mistakes. And I think if you have that attitude, like I'm going to do the best I can, and make an effort to take responsibility for any bad judgments, and be, as Clark said, introspective enough to look back and evaluate what you've done, and in the future we learn from those things.
So we aren't here to judge judgment. Rather, we provided some ideas on what judgment is and how to develop yours. Obtaining and approving your square dance judgment is based on experience, reflecting on the experience, and honing your ability to predict the outcome of your decisions. I leave you with a point that Jim Mayo made to me. We can't talk about judgment without defining the objectives. There's not general agreement about many of the aspects related to calling a dance. For example, what kind of choreography and delivery are most dancers looking for in order to have fun? And Jim would say, if we don't agree on our goals, how can we even develop judgment for the decisions used to obtain the goal? So he thought this was a pretty difficult subject. He's like, well, let's all get some agreement on what our objectives are. And he listed all the different possible objectives and said, there's agreement on this, there's no agreement on that, no one agrees on this, no one agrees on this, we do agree here. And then he's like, how can we have what judgment is when we don't even know what the objectives are? So that was kind of like, whoa. I'm like, okay, but I'll leave you with that thought. So thank you guys for coming. Thanks to Dick. Thanks to Mike.
Thank you to Clark. Thank you, Clark.